My name is Mary Whitfield. I'm 40 years old, divorced, no children. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I work a quiet office job, I go to the same grocery store every Thursday, and sometimes I forget to answer my mother's calls. It was supposed to be another Thursday. The sky was pale gray that morning, thick with the threat of rain that never quite arrived. I was walking back to my car with a carton of eggs, a jug of milk, and a bag of frozen peas. I remember thinking how peaceful the street looked, how the quiet was oddly comforting. I don't remember the truck. I remember the sound, though. That screech, that terrible crunch of metal folding in on itself. And I remember a flash of white, a light so blinding it seemed to burn through me. Then silence. Not the comforting silence of an empty house. This was a silence that had weight, a silence that pressed against me from all sides. I opened my eyes, or maybe it was something like eyes, and the world was gone. No pavement beneath my feet. No grocery bags. No cars. I stood in a space that felt endless, yet suffocatingly close, wrapped in layers of fog that pulsed like breathing walls. There was no time there. I didn't grow hungry. I didn't feel cold. I simply existed, aware and small. And then I saw him. There's no real way to describe him without failing. Not a man. Not quite light. He stood, if standing is even the right word, bathed in something that shimmered and rippled, like sunlight on water. He wasn't frightening. He wasn't comforting. He was simply undeniable. I knew it was Jesus. But not the neat, picture-perfect Jesus from church windows and children's books. He was too vast, too raw. His presence peeled back the layers of me like pages in a book I had forgotten I wrote. He saw everything. Every cruel thought I let linger. Every phone call I ignored. Every whispered judgment I thought I buried. And yet, he didn't turn from me. "Mary," he said, and his voice did not come from his lips. It bloomed inside me, as if my bones had always known the sound. "Your time has not yet come." Relief and disappointment surged together inside me, tangled and inseparable. I thought it would end there. I thought I would be sent back, and that would be my miracle. But he raised his hand, and the fog around us shifted, trembling, parting like a curtain. "I will show you something," he said, his voice as soft as rain on dry earth. "Something you have not seen, though you passed it every day." The world unfolded before me, not heaven, not hell, but a version of Raleigh I had never seen. I saw people, thousands of them, walking, working, carrying the weight of their lives. But something was wrong. Most of them, people like me, were pale, nearly transparent. Like ghosts walking through their own routines, unaware of their faded edges. But there were others. They burned. I saw black men and women, their skin like polished obsidian, but their spirits, oh their spirits, shone with an intensity that made my heart tremble. Some of them glowed so brightly, I could barely look at them. I watched as a black woman knelt in her tiny apartment, the walls stained and peeling, her hands clasped tightly, whispering a prayer that seemed to split the air around her. I saw a young black man in a crowded street, shoved and cursed at, his fists clenched, but instead of striking back, he looked up and murmured words I couldn't hear. They shone. They shone in ways I had never shown. They shone in ways most of the ghost people around them could not see. I turned to Jesus, my throat dry, questions clawing at me. "Why?" I whispered. "Why are they so vivid? Why do they burn like that?" His gaze was heavy, but there was no cruelty in it, only truth. "Because many of them know me," he said simply. "Because many of them held on when no one else would. They called out to me when the world silenced them. They prayed when all others turned away. They prayed when they were left alone." His words sank into me like cold water. I realized then that I had spent my life believing I knew who walked closest to God. I believed it was people like me, people who went to Sunday services, who kept clean homes, who said the right things. But I had not seen the prayers whispered in desperation behind locked doors. I had not seen the quiet strength carried by those the world refused to honor. And I had not prayed for them. Not really. I had prayed for myself. For my comfort. For the things I thought I deserved. Jesus did not shame me. He didn't need to. The weight of what I had not seen was enough. "You will return," he said, "but you must carry this with you." I felt myself being pulled away, the edges of the fog crumbling, the shimmering world dissolving. The last thing I heard was his voice, soft and close. "See them. Pray for them. Pray for all." That is where salvation begins. When I awoke in the hospital, the first face I saw was a nurse, a black woman with tired eyes and a patient smile. "You're with us," she said gently. "God spared you." I stared at her, my heart pounding, because I could see it, just faintly, but I could see it. She glowed. And for the first time in my life, I prayed, not for me, but for her. I was alive. At least, that's what the doctors said. "You're incredibly lucky," they told me, standing by my hospital bed with cautious smiles. "The truck should have killed you instantly. But somehow you came back." They didn't know that luck had nothing to do with it. The nurse's name was Patrice. She visited me often during those first few days. She checked my vitals, brought me water, adjusted my pillows. And every time she stood near me, I saw it. That faint glow. It wasn't as blinding as in the place I'd been, but it was there, a soft, steady light surrounding her like the warmth of a candle in a dark room. I asked about her. Quietly, carefully. She had 3 children. She worked double shifts. Her husband had passed 5 years ago. And every night she prayed. I knew this without her telling me. I could feel it. I watched her leave the room, and I sat there, shaken by something I couldn't put into words. I had been shown something. Something the world around me seemed determined to ignore. When I was discharged, I returned home to my quiet house with its soft beige walls and perfectly folded laundry. But something had shifted. The silence no longer comforted me. It pressed against me like a question I couldn't answer. I tried to go back to my life. I tried to let it all fade as a strange dream, as trauma-induced hallucination. But I couldn't unsee them. At the grocery store, at the gas station, at the park, I began noticing the faint glows around people I had once passed without a second glance. Not everyone glowed. Some people shimmered so faintly I almost doubted my sight. Others, mostly those I would have considered invisible before, burned with quiet, steady fire. Mostly it was black people. It unsettled me. Not because I feared them, but because I feared what this meant about me. About who I had been. I sat in church one Sunday looking around the congregation. Everyone looked like me. Comfortable. Polite. Pale. I wondered, how many of us were just ghosts, drifting through sermons, reciting prayers without weight? How many of us had ever prayed for anyone but ourselves? The pastor's words fell flat in my ears, distant, like they belonged to another room. I wanted to leave, but I stayed, sitting in that hard wooden pew, suffocated by the realization that I had built a life inside a carefully drawn circle. A circle where I prayed for safe travels, for good health, for the blessing of small, predictable joys. But I had never truly prayed for those outside my circle. Not the poor. Not the broken. Not those who carried the weight of history in their skin. The world I had been shown demanded that I see them. And seeing them wasn't safe. It wasn't comfortable. I began to seek them out. I volunteered at shelters. I sat in church services where the choir swayed with a rhythm I had never known, where hands reached toward the heavens not out of ritual but out of need. I prayed with them, at first timidly, then with a growing ache I couldn't contain. It was in those prayers, raw and trembling, that I began to feel alive. I began to see that salvation wasn't tidy. It wasn't an individual achievement. Salvation was in the tangled, messy prayers we carried for each other. But not everyone wanted me to see this. Not everyone wanted me to step outside the neat lines of my world. When I spoke to my friends, to my family, I watched them retreat behind tight smiles and quick dismissals. Why does it matter, Mary? You're overthinking this. Don't get caught up in things that aren't your burden. But it was my burden. It had been laid on me the moment I stood before Jesus, and he showed me what I had ignored. One evening, my mother called. I told her about Patrice, about the shelters, about the people I had met, about the light. She sighed. A heavy, tired sigh. Be careful, Mary, she said. Sometimes people see things they want to see. I almost believed her. until I began to dream of the fog again, until I heard his voice once more, whispering at the edge of sleep, "Do not turn away. Do not fall back into silence. Salvation begins when you pray beyond yourself." I would not turn away, even if the prayers made me weep, even if they made me feel small, because in that smallness, I found something I never expected. I found the weight of being truly seen. The nights were the hardest. Sleep came like a stranger, sometimes reluctant, sometimes invasive. The fog from that other place, the one where I met him, crept into my dreams, twisting and curling like smoke around my mind. One night, I found myself back there, between light and shadow. Only this time I wasn't alone. Figures emerged from the mist. They were dark, but not in the way I had seen before. These shadows were hollow, hungry, their eyes empty voids that swallowed hope. They whispered my name, a susurrus of voices layered over one another, harsh and cold. "Why do you see what others don't? Why do you chase light in a world that burns?" Fear gripped me like ice, but I remembered his words. "Do not turn away." I stood firm, though my knees shook. Then, from the heart of the fog, he appeared again, Jesus. But his light was different now. Not soft or gentle, but fierce and unwavering. He pushed the shadows back with a silence that screamed louder than their whispers. "Mary," he said, "you see because you have been chosen. But seeing brings suffering." I wanted to ask why, but the shadows roared again, and the fog churned like a storm about to break. I awoke gasping, sweat slick on my skin, the echo of that silent scream still ringing. In the days that followed, the world felt heavier. The weight of truth pressed on my chest. The people I met, especially those whose light shone brightest, carried scars deeper than skin could show. Scars from generations of silence, of prayers unheard, of a God sometimes seeming distant. Yet their faith was unshakable. I went to the community center where Patrice volunteered. I sat among strangers whose stories poured out like rivers, stories of loss, hope, endurance. Their prayers were raw and loud, full of anger and love tangled together. One woman, Mrs. Johnson, took my hand after service and whispered, "We don't just pray for ourselves here. We pray to carry each other. That's how we survive." I realized then that salvation isn't neat. It's a battlefield where every prayer is a sword, every act of faith a shield. And I, who had once only prayed for comfort, was being called to fight in ways I never imagined. But the shadows were waiting. They came in whispered doubts, in sideways glances, in old fears clawing their way up from my past. "Why burden yourself?" one voice said. "Why chase what others reject?" another. But beneath all the noise, his voice was steady. "Pray beyond yourself. See them. Save them." That night, I prayed harder than I ever had. Not for me, but for the ones the world tried to erase. And for the first time, I felt a light stir inside me, a fragile flame that refused to be snuffed out. The flame inside me grew, flickering but stubborn. Days blurred into nights as I chased the light I had glimpsed, the light burning in those I'd once ignored. But the shadows didn't relent. They pressed closer, whispering fears, twisting truths. One evening, I found myself alone in my dimly lit living room, the silence a thick blanket. The weight of everything threatened to crush me, out, guilt, the memory of those hollow eyes in the fog. I fell to my knees, and I prayed. Not the safe prayers of before, not the whispered hopes for comfort or success. This was a raw, trembling prayer, a plea from the depths of a soul laid bare. I prayed for Patrice, for Mrs. Johnson, for the men and women whose prayers lit the darkness. I prayed for the lost, the broken, the forgotten. I prayed for the world that refused to see their light. As the words left my lips, the room seemed to shift. The shadows, those lingering doubts, wavered and began to dissolve, replaced by a warmth I could not contain. I understood then. Salvation is born in prayer that reaches beyond the self. It's forged in the courage to see others, truly see them, and carry their burdens as your own. Jesus had shown me the hidden flames for a reason. Not to scare me, not to guilt me, but to call me, call all of us, to salvation through prayer and love without boundaries. If you hear this story, if you feel the weight of what you cannot ignore, do not turn away. Pray. Pray when it's hard. Pray when the world is silent. Pray for those whose light shines quietly in the shadows. Because prayer saves. Prayer connects us. Prayer breaks the darkness. And in that broken darkness, we find the brightest light.